'cause I don't wanna feel this way.
I've had the pleasure of working with Jack over the years on different projects, some commercials. Jack is a
Wisconsin Tourism, I
yes,
think, and some
yes,
other,
I did a couple of those.
Yeah.
Jack is also a fantastic, one of my favorite singers.
Wow. Thank you.
And guitar players. You play keyboards.
I do.
You play tambourine.
I do. I'm a terrible tambourine
I
player.
well, you know what? People think it's easy.
No, it's very
Until
difficult.
you're standing
I
in front of
agree.
a microphone, and you got to play it in time, and it's an acquired talent.
It is.
But it's a great use tambourine on some of the songs that you guys did on the Spill stuff.
I did. Actually, I found a really small wooden tambourine
Okay.
that wasn't kind of over the top, so there's a little bit of that in there somewhere. But
Yeah.
I didn't want to be too offensive with it.
It's a fun little instrument if used correctly.
Agreed.
Don't overuse it. But yeah, we worked on several commercials, and we've sung together, and both albums. The first one was called
It was just an EP. It was self-titled.
EP. Okay.
And so it was actually just 8 songs on it initially, and there were a couple things I left off that I just didn't feel comfortable with
Right.
and finish. But and then later on, I'd done some of that kind of in piecemeal with recording some of it in a practice space, and then later I was fortunate enough to have Mike Hoffman mix 3 of the songs that are on it, and was able to do that in Victor DiLorenzo's studio,
Yeah.
Joe's, at that time.
Yeah.
And so that was really nice.
Victor's tape machine was working at that time.
Yeah, it was working at that time. It was
Yeah,
great.
we both have had an opportunity to work in that studio, and he had a 2-inch
Yeah,
tape
beautiful
machine.
MCI 2-inch.
Yeah, and those things are finicky.
Yeah,
Yep.
but it worked. So
Mike Hoffman we lost recently.
yeah,
Mike, what was the Semi-Twang?
Semi-Twang,
Great band here from Milwaukee.
EIEIO.
Yes.
Pat McCurdy and the Men About Town. He played in the Carnival Strippers.
Yeah.
And probably the last incarnation playing with Victor too.
Great producer.
Yeah,
We
amazing
lost him,
producer.
2 months ago, I think.
It was October.
Oh, it
it's
was
almost a
long
year.
ago.
So it's very, very sad and tragic.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to engineer with Mike for about 6 years, and it was invaluable. I mean, I don't know that I would have been able to produce and create an album if I hadn't done that. I had recording experience previous to this, but not of that caliber, and or seeing the start and then eventual finish of an entire
Great
album.
producer.
So,
The albums that he did with Victor, the Blessed Faustina, especially, Victor DiLorenzo, great songwriter.
yeah.
And he really, Mike's work on that, I mean, he fleshed that thing out really. I mean, it's one of my favorite recordings.
He was incredibly good at being able to display the best elements of a song and pull you in as a listener. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was fun to watch him build arrangements and work through a collection of songs with with an artist or a band and see the best come out of them. It was, that was just to be able to be in the room and be the fly on the wall was an amazing thing. So
Also working with John Tanner,
sure,
also a lot of fun. John's a very good producer. But when did you first decide? You've been playing guitar since early age.
I started out as a drummer, actually.
Did you really? I did
Yeah, I was
not
a
know
drummer,
this.
and I was the best singer in the band.
Yes.
So eventually it became, well, let's strap a guitar on you and stand in front of people and try not to be scared.
Yeah.
So so
You up front.
barely playing guitar and trying to be the lead singer.
Do you miss playing drums?
I loved playing drums.
Yeah.
And I when I got rid of my studio space in 2016, that was one of those things. I still have a bunch of drums sitting around, and I love to sit down and play. And you realize how hard it is. This thing that you took for granted when you were doing it at a younger age, and suddenly I realized So where is the beat? Am I ahead of it? Am I behind it? Behind it? Am I trying to slide into the one? Trying to learn that.
You think in
element
terms
feel.
of that, and I'm primarily a bass player, so I'm always thinking of the rhythm sections. When I record something, I start with drums, and then the rhythm guitars, and then the bass, and getting a chance to play drums, you really understand that is the backbone of a rock song.
Yeah, and there's a certain element of it to add something to the song and not distract from it.
Right.
That can be a balance that some people get, and some people don't.
Yeah.
So.
So you started playing guitar. When did you decide to try writing your first song?
Honestly, even as a drummer, I was trying to write songs. That's the reason I picked up the guitar. And so I was writing songs in high school. Not very good songs, but I was trying to write, in my opinion. And so that's kind of where it started. When I was a senior in high school, all of a sudden I was the lead in a musical, and I was in choir. It was the first time I was in choir, and I got a scholarship to sing. And so I spent 3 years at UW-Waukesha in a very nurturing environment that for me was perfect, and a professor that really helped nurture my talent. And so I got to spend 3 years doing that and taking music theory, and I took 4 years of piano lessons. And it really, really pushed me to, get to the next place of trying to understand what I was doing. And so, for me, that was really the goal. I always wanted to write. I didn't really want to give lessons. I didn't want to. I enjoyed performing. That's a component, but I really enjoy writing more than anything else.
Right.
So.
And once you start, when did you record one of your first songs?
So when I was 14 and playing drums in a band, my friend's father, there was a band in town called Your House. I don't know if you remember them. And my friend's father's name was Tim Paremba. He had a 4-track studio in the house. And so while he was working, we basically had this reel-to-reel that we were, spending our summers doing this. I'm not sure how much his dad knew, but I think he eventually figured out we were, putting hours on his equipment. At night, these musicians would come in, and if I was lucky and hanging out, I remember meeting Derek Purcell.
Derek is
an amazing songwriter. Jim Iannelli was another guy who was there, and so there were these other players that Tim played with, and so there were a couple of times even when he would play at a bar, and his son Jeff is an amazing guitar player. He's lived in California for quite some time now, living in Texas. But Jeff's played with all sorts of people, and unbelievable. And it was his dad would call, "Hey, we're playing at this bar. Show up." So I was 16 years old and trying to play guitar, and we'd show up and play, and it was really a cool. But that was kind of where I really got interested in recording and the idea of crafting songs and sitting at home with 2 cassette decks and trying to record one part and then record another and do it again and do it again, and so
experiment.
Yeah.
And you really, when you have the time and the setup where you can try different things rather than you're renting studio space. Let's go right now.
Yeah.
You get to play with different ideas, and so 4-track recording.
Yeah.
And you probably don't remember the song, but
I believe it was one was called "Mellow Out."
Mellow. Yeah.
Yeah, they were terrible. But the point being is we were just trying to go through that process.
The process, yes.
And and I'm a fairly anxious person. For me to get in that space where I'm comfortable playing things live, it takes a little bit more. I'm not. I don't consider myself to have any talent, honestly.
Well,
I think for everything that I do, I have to work at it. And I almost think to a certain degree that's an advantage because I continually have to look at it and work at it and realize that I have to be the person who attempts to do something, but I also have to be able to look at it from a different perspective and not just go, "Wow, I've got all this talent. Look what I'm doing."
Well,
because I don't think that's ever been the case.
When you get bit by that, hey, I can put some chords together and a melody. That's it. You know, you play cover songs over the years, but you realize, you know, this is where it's really happening. You know?
Yeah, and I think for me, original songs were what it was all about. I mean, I've played in cover bands, and I do play in a cover band, but at the same time, it's always been, I've had more drive and more interest in playing my own songs.
It's hard to go back, but somebody's got to write those songs that people cover. You know, you know, when I think I first met you doing a commercial or something for John. And I went, man, this guy can sing, and you I don't know how soon after that I got to hear some of your stuff, but I thought, you know, I like, and I think you're the same way. I like songs where melody is key to the song, and it's not just, I like the way these chords sound together.
Sure.
And I'm going to, not that, you know, songs that are based on a riff or something like that can't be you know, really good, but right away I thought this guy is a songwriter that, you know, melody is important. And so
I think you had asked me the question earlier, what instrument I typically write on, and to be honest, I write more with my voice than I do anything else. And for me, it's always starts with a melody.
Right.
If I, you know, it's fun to write riffy stuff, and to me that became something that they just weren't as enjoyable song-wise to me. I would much rather listen to a melody that pulls me in and takes me someplace, and that's usually where I try to write. You know, that seems to be the place that's most comfortable for me, and that's my instrument. So.
I kind of lean towards that myself. That if I hear a melodic line in my head, I'll, you know, put it down on my little recorder and try to go from there. And usually that's, and you'd be surprised then, it makes you have to think about chord structure a little differently, because now rather than I've got these chords and I got to sing a melody on top of it, I've got this melody and I've got to build the chord structure around this melody, and it to me it makes for a much more interesting song.
I agree.
So when you got your first song recorded and you wow, there's drums in there, there's guitars, everything, and it's coming out of the speakers, you know, that when you kind of go, yeah, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think, you know, for a while I was kind of, you know, playing the back seat part with Mike and engineering and really trying to learn as much as I could. And really, I was also working at a radio station at the time, and it was an AM station in town that was called the Warp. It was AM 1340, and it was all this. It was probably the first alternative station in town besides
on AM.
You know, WMSE. Wow. Well, and it was a way for them to sort of make it look like they had a much bigger playlist. They had all this alternative music, and then they played all this heavy metal, and then you know, it looked like they were playing all this stuff in one big playlist.
Right.
And so you know, there were 30 CDs a week that would come in that I was listening to.
Wow.
So I got all this music, plus I was listening to all this music that was, you know, that was getting played, and so I got to hear Big Star, and I got to hear Jules Shear, and there were, you know, Mark Everett Oliver, and I got to hear all these other songs, and lots of new wave stuff, and lots of alternative things that kind of fit in there. The Posies, who I was a big fan of, and Big Star.
Big Star. I remember you talking about them.
And so that kind of stuff became, you know, a part of my vernacular, fortunately, because I really wasn't exposed to that. I was exposed to a lot of rock songs and the stuff that I mean, I loved the Cars, and I liked a lot of proggy things early on. You know, I loved King Crimson, and I loved that kind of stuff.
I saw them a while back.
Yeah, amazing. You know.
Yeah, I listened to it, and I don't know what's going on here, but I like it. It's like, you know, and to see it live, it was really cool.
And the fact that Adrian Belew lived in, you know, Wisconsin for quite some time, and you know, there was a bit of a connection there. And again, another power pop band that I absolutely loved was the Bears that he was in, and I got to see them twice at UWM, and they were just unbelievable. And I had some friends that eventually. They were from Ohio and Cincinnati and knew the rest of the guys in the Psychodots that played with him in that band. But to get back to your question, I'd done some recording, but nothing particularly good at that point. I'd done something with a friend, and we had something that got played on a local radio, the local show that Marilyn Me had on Laser.
Marilyn, yes.
And I can remember being extremely proud, not necessarily that the recording was great, but we had worked very hard, and it was very clean and came across well, and I was extremely happy with
and
that.
you're starting to go, I think we're getting it here.
And I wanted to do that.
Right.
Where I had kind of this gigantic over the top was Mike recorded 3 songs over 2 days for me, and I just kind of lost it. They sounded so good, and he brought so much of his talent and time to it that I could never repay him for that.
Yeah.
But I was extremely fortunate that he allowed me to be under this light in some way that I never imagined I could be.
Yeah.
So it just it helped me see that there was another path.
Right.
So
yeah. Who are some of your favorite songwriters that you can say, yeah, that guy always kind of knocks me out?
I'm a huge Jellyfish fan.
Okay.
That band to me was I guess their work ethic and the arrangements and just how smart I thought the songs were and the craft of it, I still think is brilliant. And so Andy Sturmer and Roger Joseph Manning are definitely 2 of my favorite. I'm a huge Badfinger fan. Pete Ham, again, that's
really well-crafted songs.
Well-crafted songs, and it wasn't. I think it was after that the 10cc really hit me too.
Yeah,
I mean,
Tanner loved that band.
Yeah.
He was like enamored with them, and I saw a documentary on how they recorded "You're Not in Love." All those.
Oh my God!
They multi-tracked hundreds of vocals.
Sure.
It's on YouTube. If you get a chance, watch it. It's mind-boggling how they put that together, but really good song. The Things You Do for Love.
Yeah, of course,
great melodies.
So, and great melody, but let alone a fantastic lyric idea. And there's so many possibilities, and they take you down that pathway. I mean, that to me is just absolutely genius.
I see that in your songs. They're well thought out. They're well put together. And what would be now a really popular top 40 pop song that everybody knows? What would be one of your favorite? Well, the 10cc thing. Good songwriter.
I was gonna say definitely that's it. I mean, no matter what, I probably was not a top 10 hit. I'm trying to think of other. What was the Happy that Pharrell Williams did?
Yeah.
Which again, hearing that, and I'm like, whether I liked all the elements of it or not, initially, I'm like, it's a brilliant song. It's well written. It's smart, and I every time it came on the radio, I'm like, I would crank it up because I wanted to have one.
Well recorded.
We didn't want to have one.
I tell people this all the time, that once you delve into what has to be done to record a song really well, put it together, you never really listen casually to music anymore. You start picking it apart, like talking about tambourine. Wow, that's a good tambourine. That snare sounds really good. And it's a blessing and a curse. You listen for, well, how did they make that sound so cool?
Yeah, I don't think that is the detriment, because I can't do that anymore. I can't listen to something in a casual way that just goes, I just want to pull it in. I purposely not learn certain songs because I don't want to understand. Even though I can figure it out, and I can read music, I can do all of that. I don't necessarily want to take the meal apart and look at all of its ingredients.
Right.
Sometimes
you don't
I
want
just
to see how the
want
sausage
to
is made. Yeah.
bathe in it.
Right.
And,
I kind of started to turn my attention more to classical music to just listen to, because I can't pick it apart. I can just appreciate it for what it is, because it's harder for me to comprehend what's involved for a composer to put something together like Mozart or something. Big fan of Mozart, but you still appreciate the melodic content that
Sure,
a lot of
sure.
these composers had. Um,
And I also like some, honestly, 20th century composition is fun to listen to me, because to listen to dissonant things
mhm.
is really sort of fun to explore beyond what I think is the palette that I'm
Right,
used to having.
exactly.
And I love it when someone can bend the rules and
Right.
get away with it in a
Mhm.
way that makes a popular song, and then you hear that in popular song and you go, all right, someone took and sort of slipped one in there.
Steely Dan was
Oh, yeah.
a big proponent of and it's always there's always something really interesting going on underneath there that I wouldn't have thought of, but
Well, the Beatles were able to get away with that kind of
Yeah.
thing too. I mean, I
Mhm.
didn't until I watched some of the documentaries, realizing that Eleanor Rigby was really kind of styled around Psycho,
Mhm.
and the strings in it. Those
Yeah.
It fascinating to think that that's what was influencing them at
Yeah.
the time.
Mhm.
What Brian Wilson was doing, what was influencing him as
Right.
well. I mean, it's those things are. We have so much more material now than when we were
Right.
young kids.
Exactly.
That's accessible by sitting in front of YouTube. That you've got this gigantic school that you can go down this rabbit hole.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's kind of an endless thing. now.
I never was a super big fan of the Beach Boys until I listened to, and Victor, one of his favorite albums is Pet
That
Sounds.
sounds, yeah.
Pet Sounds, and what was Live with
Yeah,
Me.
God only knows
Yeah.
what I do.
And
without
I
you.
really listened to that and I went, holy cow. that
Well,
was-
yeah, and so much of the fact that the Wrecking Crew is on this,
Yes.
and so much of that arrangement is brought together, yes, by him,
Mhm.
but they add a lot of other elements to
Yeah.
it that are,
Mhm.
genius. So
Mhm.
it's, that to me, I guess the more you could listen to things like, or just listening to the Beatles made me really want to
Mhm.
pick apart arrangements and think
Right.
about songwriting in a different way.
Paul McCartney was a big influence on me as a bass player because his bass parts were so melodic
Oh yeah,
and
Such
well
a-
thought out, and I thought, you know what, I just did a song where I catch myself going, what would Paul do in this? And I know it's stupid,
Oh,
but
yeah.
just again going back to your songs, they're just well thought out and well put together. The harmonies, and again, there's still that edge. The guitar stuff on there is really cool. All the guitar work on it.
Thank you. Well, some of it's. I mean, I wrote the basic components of 8.5 of the songs,
Mhm.
and Andrew Hintz played the
Mhm.
other guitar on it,
Uh-huh.
and did an amazing job. Like
Mhm.
especially on the Wrong, he walked in with that arrangement,
Isn't
and it was this whole string arrangement that
Mhm.
essentially was done with an EBow, and it's brilliant.
And working with guys like that, and
Yeah.
working with Ralph, it makes you want to raise your game a little
Sure,
bit. And
sure.
now, in the process of recordings, and you can throw as you know, as much stuff, as many tracks at a song as you want. Do you ever think about, but we got to play this live?
Yeah, there were times I'd think about that, but I always figured there would be a way to pull it off.
Right.
I mean, I had already
Okay.
written the song in a very basic format in my head, just playing it.
Mhm.
So, I think about it a little differently now, just because I had two friends that were in a duo,
Mhm.
and I'd go watch this duo, and I thought, I'm sitting here listening to this band, and I'm hearing all these parts that they're not playing per
Mhm.
se,
Right.
because I know the songs.
Right.
So, another part, if you're really a fan of the songs, you hear so much of that song in your head already,
Right.
unless you're massacring it.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah.
We've all seen bands do.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
if you're trying to faithfully reproduce the parts that you can, I still think there's a
The
way to
essence
do
of it,
that.
yeah.
In an honest way. That
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's anything wrong with people, playing to recorded tracks. It's not the way I want to do it, and
Mhm.
I play in an 80s new wave band, and there's nothing sequenced.
Right.
And that was part of the goal, was to play it like a rock band.
Right.
And you can watch video after video of people playing live where they have to do it that
Mhm,
way,
mhm.
and when the money isn't there, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's where sometimes you see the true, the talent.
I think the other bonus of writing your own stuff and playing it live is we can play it whatever way we want,
Yeah, and I think you figure out that balance.
Right,
I think there's a balance
exactly.
being true to what you imagine the song to be and the way in which people are also going to carry it around with
Mhm.
them.
Have you ever
You know?
forgotten lyrics?
Yes.
People think
Plenty of
that's
time.
funny that you go. We just had a little reunion thing when Ralph was up here, and I slaughtered songs. I couldn't remember it, and people think, well, how can you forget? You wrote the lyrics. I can remember cover songs pretty easily that I did over and over again. But yeah, people find that funny that you,
And I think it depends on, I recall I have a certain amount of recall, but over a period of time, if you're not playing
Right.
them and you're connecting with it, you forget it.
Yeah.
There's some, I found this gigantic rabbit hole of a website that's about a guy who came up with a chart of how many times you'd have to play something for how long you'd have to remember it.
Yeah.
And it was, this guy developed this whole thing in 1880 something. And the more I thought through his process, I'm like, he's actually pretty spot on.
Right.
You need to go back to these things.
Mhm.
And yes, you're going to reimagine them and change it a little bit over time.
Mhm.
But still, I think it's one of these things you have to work at it.
Yeah.
And like everything, I guess there are those people who
Mhm.
do quote unquote have talent, and they can just pull this stuff off and they remember it. The gift is never having it, so you have to work at it.
Right.
So
Yeah, I remember a couple times starting a song and going, and had a few bars before I had to start singing. I'm going, and I had a brain fog, and I couldn't remember the first line of the song, and I'm like, okay, I can make something up because
have you leaned over to another band member to find out? Because I've done that.
I looked at him
Yeah.
like, what's the first line in the but yeah, that's funny. That's funny. And then there's other cover tunes that you could do in your sleep, It's
Sure.
funny. Anyway, well, so have you ever tried gone down the rabbit hole of really liking a certain band? And a lot of people say this, don't try, appreciate your influences, but don't try to sound like them. Have you ever
True.
gotten halfway through a song that you were putting together and went, this sounds a little bit too much like, or the chord pattern is too much like that, or
I've had some where I'll, part of that feels that way, and so I'll either rework it or,
change a couple things.
sometimes you go, okay, wait a minute, yeah, this is just,
Yeah.
I have to step away from this.
Mhm.
But most of the time, the melodies I connect to are things that feel fairly foreign
Mhm.
to me initially, and then, so I mean, I don't know. I don't think about a circumstance where I finished anything and I went, oh my God, that sounds just like,
Yeah.
and no one's ever
You know
walked up to me and said,
pretty-
oh, it sounds
pretty
just like
early
this.
on.
But
I think one of the problems of writing on your instrument, say your guitar player, as soon as you pick the guitar up, your hands fall into certain patterns, and I think what you were talking about, that you start with a melody, then you're not drawn towards your influences as much as this is what I'm used to playing on guitar. And
well, like you said, muscle memory is part of this
Right,
challenge.
right.
It's a benefit and a detriment.
Mhm.
It's easy to go right back to the places that are familiar,
Right.
but trying to put yourself in a place where you force yourself to not think about familiar things.
Mhm.
And that's, like I said, one of the things I like about 20th century classical music is that.
Right.
It's very unfamiliar.
Mhm.
The same thing I like, I'm playing keyboards in a synthesizer band right
Mhm.
now, and it's continually throwing something in front of me that is forcing yourself to think about sound in a very different way,
Mhm.
and then how am I going to play it?
Mhm.
And
Right.
something that's very different on a keyboard is there's one place to play middle C.
Mhm.
There's 3 places to play middle C on a guitar,
Right.
and they each have a little different tone.
Right.
So those things are
Right.
places that you kind of have to push yourself to do something outside your comfort zone. I did that with keys too after
Mhm.
a while,
Mhm.
because it's easy for people to write songs in G and A and
Right.
and D, and I would often really try to get myself to start writing things in different keys
Mhm.
intentionally. So
And you can sense when I was listening to your album, I could sense that the concepts, the basic concepts of the songs were melodically based, and they weren't tied down to certain styles or something that you may have been influenced by. And I really believe that that's how the best songs get written, is if you've got it conceptualized in your head before you even pick up an instrument, and then you go, okay, let's flesh this out, let's get it to go where it
yeah,
has
and
to
then,
go.
and I think I've had both success in
Mhm.
both, or at least tried to
Right.
do it with both of them, where you sometimes it's the melody initially, and sometimes it's like you're going through those parts where
Mhm.
I think you have to work through either side,
Mhm.
and that's part about I think trying to balance out how you work as a songwriter.
I think that's the reason that the team of Bernie Taupin and Elton John was so fruitful, is he'd give Elton John these lyrics, and okay, now you gotta build the music around this. So it gave him more of a, okay, I can't just play this pattern that I'm used to
Mhm.
playing and fall into these comfortable patterns, and great songwriter that way.
Sure.
Back in the old Irving Berlin, stuff like that, great songs. And I'd like to see more of that. I see some stuff on YouTube, other sources, where I see songwriters that are really musical. There's a lot of stuff that is just based on a beat or something, but there are a lot of young songwriters that are musically very adept and are writing real songs.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole game of this has changed very different.
Mhm.
There's quite a change in it when Phineas can sit at home with a laptop and a keyboard,
Right.
and
Mhm.
and make a Grammy Award-winning album with
Mhm.
his sister,
Right.
and pull off 7 songs or 6 songs, whatever it is,
Mhm.
that are getting airplay, and it's just him in his bedroom, and he has the ability to do this.
Yeah.
That sort of changes what we've been doing.
In the old days, we would, if we could get access to a studio, you'd have to go in there and quickly you didn't have the freedom to experiment. That doesn't work. You had to get in and get out. And
And hope
yeah.
you got some magic,
Yeah.
in the middle when you played it well.
Bon Iver,
Yeah.
also another example of a guy who sat there and labored over
Yeah.
a concept until he got it to sound, and that way you could get a sound, an overall, rather than just drums, bass, okay, let's go, bring in the guitars, here we go.
Yeah,
kind of
I
thing.
mean, he's locked up in a cabin,
Yeah.
near Rice Lake somewhere,
Yeah.
north of Eau Claire,
Yeah.
working through this stuff, and he's found something that people connect with.
Right.
And how lucky you are that you can find an audience that is
Mhm.
willing to pay to see you, for
Mhm.
one, and for your recordings, and wants to follow you and feels that you're a necessary part
Right.
of their lives. How lucky are you?
You make them hear something that makes them go, I haven't heard that before. That is, I think, a big part. Well, speaking of King Crimson, when they first came out, when I first heard them, I went, okay, there's something going on here. I've never,
It was totally different than
Yeah.
things I had heard
Yeah.
at that point.
and
I think it's, there's something to be said about, not just about the writing part, but to go through the whole process.
that
and
was going to
hope-
be my other question. You're trying to not just record a song, you're trying to capture a feeling in that song. Same thing Brian Wilson did you know.
Yeah, and hope that an audience enjoys it.
Mhm.
I mean, I know it's I'd like to be able to say that I wrote songs just for myself, but
Mhm.
I wrote songs and I hoped that someday
Yeah.
it would provide a living for me.
You're not in
You
a
know.
vacuum, and that's the thing. People, if you're a songwriter, you're just gonna write. Once
That's what you
once
do.
your brain starts to think musically in those terms of not just playing what other people have played. I don't know if it's the same for you. You all day long, something will pop in your head, and you'll go, maybe I should remember that. And it doesn't matter whether you're going to sell it or not. It's very gratifying to take an idea from a simple melodic idea and try to turn it into a song.
Sure, and sometimes it's a lyric idea that
Mhm.
that you hear a melody against that
Mhm.
and you want to exploit that in some way or expound on that.
Mhm.
And that's
Right.
yeah. I mean, there's it's hard not to do that in your daily life when this is the muscle that you've
You
been working
spent
to
a few years in
you
a
know,
row
doing it.
and going, okay, I've got to come up. You're not forcing yourself to come up with the ideas. Your brain just starts working that way.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there are those people, the Nashville cats that I've met. I took I was fortunate. I took a couple songwriting classes, and these guys get together and they sit in a
Mhm.
room and they hash it out. So
And
there
that-
it is. What's your idea? What's this? And
That's a great
that's
way
the
to
way they
do it.
work.
Yeah.
And there are people. Philip Glass has a great documentary that's out that's interesting to watch, and that he said, most people think that I have a notepad next to my bed and I have a
Right.
tape recorder
Right.
and this is how I work. And he goes,
Mhm.
no, I don't. What I do is I get up at 8 in the morning and I work until 5, and
Mhm.
that's when the muse comes to me. And if it doesn't, well, then I'm going to have the rest of my life outside of that.
Exactly.
And so he compartmentalizes this in a way
Right.
that I don't think every other songwriter does. But there's people like the tale, the idea that you are doing this thing it just magically comes to you.
Exactly.
And for years, Midwestern Jinx was a song that just kind of fell out of me.
That is
it
a
did.
great song.
Well, you're very kind.
It's a
Thank
very-
you.
And so how did that come to you? I mean, was it that
The melody
term?
came to me,
Mhm.
and the kind of the verse and the chorus
Mhm.
came to me very quickly.
Mhm.
And
Isn't
I
that-
grabbed the guitar and I sat
Exactly.
down, and this just sort of, I was just trying to get the feel that
Right. It's a feel. Exactly.
and that was happening, and then the rest of it was okay. That kind of started sort of verse, and then the chorus kind of opens up a great deal more
Mhm.
and sort of arrives at this point, and that was just happening in
Mhm.
my head.
Right.
But the term Midwestern Jinx was kind of this thing that I guess I thought about. Well, here I am. I'm not
In the
in
Midwest.
California.
Yep,
I'm not
yep.
everywhere else. And
Mhm.
kind of the one of the challenges is you do this in the place that you have family, that you love, and where you have work. And
Mhm.
I grew up here. My family's here. And I didn't want to leave here. So,
Exactly.
but I think there's a little bit of a chip on the Midwestern shoulder about
Exactly.
going, I've got this Midwestern jinx.
I gotta go to Nashville. I gotta go to the West Coast. I gotta go.
Yeah.
Even if you go out there, that doesn't mean the ideas are gonna become
Yeah,
more
exactly.
fruitful.
And I met a lot of people who struggled greatly trying to
Mhm.
get to these places to be somewhere,
Right.
and weren't really focusing on songwriting anymore. They were focusing on living, which I was already at base poverty line for
Yeah.
a while in
Yeah.
that
Oh, yeah.
light. And so I didn't know how I was going to continue to do these things at the same time when I was just trying to figure out how am I going to eat.
Right.
When everything on your plate is yellow, and the only
Yeah.
thing you're alternating are the beans and the corn,
Yeah.
it got to be a little old
Yeah.
quickly. So,
Yeah, and that's the thing. I guess you have to convey to people that want to delve into songwriting is, don't worry about if people do what feels natural to you.
it really
Right.
feels natural.
Go through. Find every process is different.
Yeah.
Find your process, and if it starts to build on itself, if you do develop a process, like you were saying, Philip Glass, did it his way. Every songwriter, there's no way to do it. You can take classes in songwriting, but you can't take classes in inspiration, you know.
True.
And but you can't think about, you know, and we did that first Feet of Clay album. We just sat there and we, you know, started the tape running, and we're gonna make this sound the best that we can. And I'm sure you guys did the same thing. And you know, you can't think, nobody writes a hit song. People write songs that become hits.
True.
So you can't.
True. Yeah, I think there's, you know, you can sit down with the idea in mind, but you're chasing a zeitgeist that is, you know, impossible.
Exactly.
If there's one thing that worked for me lyrically that I'd in part be, I really like Pat Pattison, and he wrote this great book about lyric writing, and honestly, he's got all these exercises to work through, and for me, it was a good eye opener.
Right.
You know, just like taking a class or something like that. And I did take a class with him, but it was cool just for him to sort of go, oh, we'll try this. Here, try something else.
Exactly.
That makes you see it in a way that you didn't see it before.
Exactly.
Because if I'm going to write the same song over and over again, then I don't want to listen to it either.
Right.
So.
I think eventually, after you've written a few songs, you start to realize that you have a process that you go, okay, I want the words to, and that's kind of goofy. I don't want to go there. You find a process that works for you, and sometimes they just write themselves. You know, it's like I've got the idea, and it falls together. Sometimes you got to labor a little bit at it, and try to make it make sense.
And sometimes you have to sit with it and let it you know, ferment a little while.
Yeah, and
until it starts to.
I'm sure you've had songs where it just never really got to the end, and you just
there are a couple of them. You know what, that I couldn't take it where I wanted it to go.
Exactly.
So that's okay too. There are those that maybe someday they'll form into something, but if they don't, that's all right too.
Yeah.
So
write them all down. Write all those lyrics down, and just keep them, and then revisit them later, and maybe okay, that makes a little more sense now. I think I know where I want that to go. If not, at least you get to see your process of how you put it together. I really appreciate this, Jack.
Cool.
Again, the albums are
Breakup Songs for Beginners.
Yes, Breakup Songs for Beginners. Great album. It's on Spotify. You can find it.
And you can find it on Spotify. Sells on CD Baby, I believe, and you know, I think you can buy it on Apple, on iTunes.
Yeah,
You know.
and every song, you know, there's something. One of my favorite bands, XTC.
Sure. Yeah. Andy Partridge, Colin Moulding, amazing.
Every song has something cool going on.
Yeah, they're amazing songwriters. I mean,
the
Mayor of Simpleton. You know, Peter Pumpkinhead. The Smartest Monkeys is to me one of my absolute favorites.
When I heard that album, when I got that, and I have that in 5.1, I like it so much when they released it. Every time I listen to it, I get something out of it.
Just great writing.
But again, every song on Breakup they're all great songs.
Well,
and
thank you very much.
I can tell that that you guys really worked on it hard, and
we spent a long time.
It's a process, isn't it?
And I think it was also about becoming better musicians, and better as a band, and that to me was just as much a part of the process as writing good songs.
Right.
You know, that was done, but we had to be as good as we could to be able to play them well and do them justice. So that was fun.
The blessing of doing it yourself is that you get the time to really think it out. The curse is you got to do everything yourself. You know, you got to get the drums to sound good. You've got to, which is a whole thing in itself. But it's a great sounding record, and I love the lyrics. And thank you for sharing your process here. And
you're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Any new stuff? Have you got any new stuff that you want?
I don't have anything recorded yet, but
Yeah.
I've got
It's
a
a
collection of
process.
songs that would be definitely different than
Yeah.
playing in a rock band.
Well, that's cool. That's
playing
cool.
in an '80s new wave
You know-
band and playing in a synth band has definitely changed my process mentally a little bit.
Well-
but still, it's very lyric and melody driven. But yeah, it'll hopefully appeal to probably a different audience, but still songwriters.
Well, when you're in a rock band like Spill was,
Yeah.
you know you got to write songs for a rock band. When you don't have that as
Yeah,
as
and that's
a
what it was.
limiting
That's what I
factor.
wanted to write at the time, and that's the music I
Right.
I was primarily listening to. I've gotten a little older, and I hear things in a different way. So
The whole power pop thing, and some people don't like power pop.
they're
And
just
that-
classic songs to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah, great. Let me know when you get some stuff recorded. I'd
All
love
right.
to hear it.
cool.
And I loved working with you on stuff over the years.
Cool.
Great singer. Yeah, Tanner, when he
Good
hired
working with
you,
as well.
we did that one song that sounded like a certain band. Remember that one?
Yes, and
I kept telling Tanner, I said, somebody's going to say something about this.
I think it was intentional.
You think
To be-
so?
No, I very much so think it was
Do you think you
intentional.
wanted to see what he could get away with? or-
No, I think it was done. It was what was funny about it is, so the story is they write this song that sounds just like a Supergrass song.
Mhm.
Someone immediately says that it sounds just like a Supergrass song when they show it at a press release, and the response is that John's not available for 2 weeks. All of a sudden they get all this, and I heard the story on National Public Radio, which meant that it got more airplay
Yeah.
than you could get nationally for Wisconsin tourism in any other way. So if it wasn't a stunt, then
Yeah.
it worked out perfectly. If
Yeah.
it was a stunt, it worked out perfectly.
Well, yeah.
So,
And you did a great job
Thank you.
on the vocal.
but we got to do it a second time.
Yeah.
So, and then wrote a
And-
different song.
Yeah, I said to John, this, there's a line, you can kind of sound like a song, but it sounded exactly like it. But,
It worked. So
Yeah.
you know what? The end result was we got to do it. We got paid twice. I had to do the work twice,
Yeah.
but I got paid again.
Yeah.
So,
But again, thank you so much.
oh, thank you.
And this will be, we'll have, what's the name of the song again?
Wrong.
Wrong. Maybe my favorite one on there, but the whole album is great. And we'll have Wrong on the channel for people to,
Good.
and
Yay.
we'll see what happens. But again, one of my favorite songwriters and
Thank you.
fun guy to work with. We had too much fun sometimes, didn't we?
Well,
It was great.
good. It got wacky and weird sometimes, guys.
Football. When you did that, everybody knows there's downtime in between takes, and you go into the Christopher Walken thing, and John and I were on the floor, and it took us a while to recover from that. But again, it's all funny. It can
I was a
be-
latchkey child again.
Yeah.
I'm stuck at home by myself, watching television.
Yeah.
I couldn't help it. It was kooky and weird. Wow. Man,
Okay.
you gotta hide the bodies somewhere. It just happens.
Okay.
God, man. So, thank you.
It was a
fun.
good time.